In the opening, I mentioned the old command line interface that's still built into various Windows products, such as this Windows 7. Just thought it might be nice if we took a quick look at it. So we'll go to the Start, All Programs. We'll come up here to Accessories, and you'll see here Command Prompt. When I click on it, I get my Command Prompt window open. I can also get to it by clicking and in the search type in CMD, and that's where it gets the CMD name from, as that's the command that's used to run it. If I come up here, it supports a lot of the old basic commands. If you don't remember any of these, there's things like dir would bring up a directory of what you have, cls would clear the screen, cd would change you to another directory. It stood for change directory. And if you see here, I also have an old batch file in here, that myps.bat. So if I type in myps.bat, you can see here I have a fairly simple little file that will change me over to the C drive by typing in C:. It changes directories and then displays the list of files in that directory. So I just type in myps and run it. I'm switched over to my intro directory. So pretty simple and straightforward. The batch language isn't very complete. There's only some very basic things you can do with it. So it's kind of limited on what you can handle. Mostly what you wound up doing was writing custom applications to do the things you wanted, and then you just had the batch application call those custom apps. So we're going to exit out of here, and then we're going to take a look at PowerShell. Next, let's take a look at PowerShell itself and launch a PowerShell window. So we're going to click on the Start menu. We'll go to All Programs. We'll come up here to Accessories. And we'll come down here to Windows PowerShell. And then you can see I have a couple of options. I have a PowerShell x86 shell for doing the old x86 command-based stuff. I then have a standard Windows PowerShell, which is 64-bit based. And then I have these two ISEs, which I'll explain in a little bit. So we'll just click on the Windows PowerShell, and it opens us up a window that's somewhat reminiscent of the command window you just saw. However, it's got a lot more power and flexibility. Before I start showing you that, though, there's some customizations that you're going to want to do to make PowerShell easier to work with. If I come up here to the menu and I go to Properties, there's a few things I'm going to want to tweak. First of all, I probably want my screen buffer to be a little bit wider than 80 characters. I typically set mine to 120. Then on the height of the buffer, you want to set that to a very high number. A lot of the PowerShell commands can be extremely verbose. They can dump you a lot of information out. If you want to be able to keep a track of that information and scroll back up to it, you want to make your buffer size really tall. So I usually start out with mine as 3000, and if that's not enough, then I can go back and increase it later. The window size I also set to 120. The height, however, can be variable because what's really important is that buffer. And you can easily change the height once it's on the screen. So for the shortcut, you can typically leave that at just 50, and then you can adjust it if you need to. Some other things you might want to do is change the font from the standard raster-based font to one of the other Consolus or Lucidia Console fixed-based fonts. Or you may want to change the colors. So let's click OK. And you can see here, I've now got this quite a bit wider. Another thing you can do is create shortcuts and have different settings for your various shortcuts. For example, let's close this, and we'll come here, and we'll just go back to the All Programs, Accessories, PowerShell, and we'll right-click, do a Send To, and we can send this to the desktop as a shortcut. As you can see up here, I have 3 shortcuts set up for PowerShell. I have them labeled as green, blue, and amber, and when I open them up, you can see here I have an amber looking screen. If I come in here to the properties, you can see I've changed the font to Consolus in a 14-point size. I also have a green set up here, and in the green one, I'm actually using the green foreground color and Lucidia Console as the font. Finally, I have something that'll harken a lot of people back to the old days of DOS, and I have the blue with the white raster font set up. Now, you may think that this is just kind of a nice example kind of thing, but I actually find it extremely useful to have different shortcuts set up with different color schemes and fonts. Often when I want to run multiple scripts at the same time, it can be handy to have the different colored windows so that I can easily identify which script is running in which window. Okay, let's close some of these, and then we'll launch just one of them, and we'll take a look at a few basic commands. Here you can see I've opened up my blue PowerShell window, and a lot of the old DOS-based commands still work. For example, I can do a cd, and we'll go to our scripts directory, ps01-intro, and whenever we have a path name that has spaces in it, we do need to include those inside of quotation marks. So there I am, and I can do a dir, and you can see what's out there. I can copy files, copy x.text, a.text, and I can get my directory again. I can even clear the screen if I want to, cls. But what's interesting is, not only do DOS-based commands work, but a lot of, say, Linux or Unix-based commands might work. So if I do an ls, I get a listing. If I want to copy a file, I can do a cp, and we'll copy x.text to b.text this time. And we'll get another listing, and you can see all the files are there, and I'm actually using Linux-based or Unix-based commands to move around. Now these commands don't really exist within PowerShell. Instead, Microsoft used a concept called aliasing. They wanted to make PowerShell easy to use for people who are transitioning over from both, say, the Windows Server admin people, Linux or Unix-based people, and other folks. By using aliasing, Microsoft made it easy for a lot of commands, such as dir or ls, to be mapped onto the specific PowerShell commands. We can find the list of aliases available to us by using the get alias commandlet. Here you can see we've got quite a long list available to us, and let me scroll up some. Here you're going to see dir maps to get child item. If I scroll down a little bit, we'll find the ls command, which also maps to get child item. So coming down here, a dir and an ls and a get child item commandlet should all give us the exact same results because they're all really the exact same command. Now, if you come from a history of another operating system and you're trying to learn PowerShell and you want to use some commands that are standard to you, you can actually set your own aliases. For example, let's say you like to have a command called list. Well, there is no list command built into PowerShell. So you can actually do a set alias. You'll give it the name that you want to create, and then we'll give it the actual command you want to execute. Get child item. So now when I type in list, there it is, it actually works for me. Be aware though, the lifetime of list is only good as long as this PowerShell window is open. If I actually close it, and then I reopen it, and type in list, it's not there. I would actually have to go recreate it. And we'll do it again, and there I actually have list. It is possible to save your aliases out to a file and then reload them. So for example, I could use the export alias command, and the name we want to give it is c:\ps /my alias dot, we'll use CSV because it does a comma separated value file. And then I can actually specify the aliases I want to save. I can do so by using wildcards, or I can actually just give it the individual command. Now, when I exit out of here, and I reopen it, I can then do a list, which of course won't be here, but now if I do an import alias c:\ps /my alias.csv. Now I type in list. Lo and behold, it's there. I can actually include a whole bunch of aliases within this CSV file and then just load them whenever I want to. Okay, let's look at some more commands that are going to be useful to us. So far, we've been doing everything in these DOS-based-like command windows. But you can see that this might get kind of kludgy after a while if you wanted to start writing your own scripts because there's no good debugging tools built into it. You have to jump to a separate editor to actually edit anything. And overall, it's just not a very pleasant experience. Microsoft knew that, and they actually created something for version 2 of PowerShell called the Integrated Scripting Environment. So I go back to the Start, All Programs, Accessories. We'll come down here to Windows PowerShell. And here's our Integrated Scripting Environment. Now this is the default layout for it, and up here at the top you can see where we can edit scripts at. In the middle section is our results pane. This is where whenever we execute either a script or whenever we type in something from the immediate window down here, I could type in dir, or I can type in get child item, and you can see they both print out here. You can see there is some wrapping going on because of the file sizes and limitations of the screen window, but you get the idea. Now, personally, I really don't like having my output window right in the middle of the screen. I kind of like it at the very bottom. Makes it easier for my eyes to always know to look at the bottom. So the first thing I do is usually move it down to the bottom, and I did so using this little toggle button here. If you know you're going to work more in interactive mode than in script mode, you can actually hide the script pane by clicking that button there, and now you just have interactive mode, and you get a little more space for your commands. And there you go. You can also change the layout. For example, if you come to these buttons here, you can actually move your script pane over to the right. You can maximize it, or you can come back over here to the default view. Some of the other items are pretty standard. You can see we have built-in debugging support, which we'll get into later. We can go view the different items, such as the script pane, the command pane, and so forth. We can have the standard editing function capabilities. We can open files, save them, open up a new PowerShell tab so that we can have multiple tabs open, and the usual assortment of things that you would expect after a Microsoft product. Okay, that gives you a little overview of the integrated scripting environment. Let's actually use it to start taking a look at some basic commands available to us. For this next section, I've loaded a script into the ISE, and we'll use this to illustrate some of the more common commands you're going to want to get to know right away. I could choose to run the entire script by coming in here and clicking on the Run Script button, but I actually want to execute only pieces of this at a time. To do so, I can highlight this, and then I can either click the Run Selection button, or I can hit the F8 key. The first command that I've just executed is get command. As you can see here, I have a list of all of the available commandlets that are currently loaded into my PowerShell environment. I say currently loaded because it is possible to load up what are called providers, and these providers will extend the list of commandlets that you have available to you. As you can see though, out of the box, the list is pretty rich. We can also narrow down the get command by passing in parameters. For example, I can do a get command that shows me all the commandlets that have the verb get. And here you can see in my output window things like get PS drive, get provider, get random, get service, that kind of thing. I can also choose to look for only nouns. For example, I can find all the nouns that have the word service in them. And you can see there's just a handful. Get service, new service, restart, and so forth. The next command you're going to want to get to know is get help. Get help will show you details about a particular commandlet. So if I highlight this, you can see here I've asked for help on the get command, and you can see I've got the name of the command, a synopsis, very short description about it, I've got the basic syntax for using it. I've got a description, which gives you a brief overview, and I have some related links. For example, get help, get PS drive, get member, import PS session, and so forth, you might want to look at as part of what get help can do. It then tells us if we want to see more, we can go to get help, get dash command dash examples. I can use dash detail to get more info, and I can really get down and dirty and go into the dash full. So let's see what those output for us. We'll do the examples. And you can see down here, we've got 11 different examples of how to use the get command. We can go further, and we'll do details. And here we are with more detailed information, and the dash detailed also includes the list of examples. Finally, we can go to the dash full, and here we are with the output for dash full. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to show you about getting help is many of the commands support a dash question mark parameter for getting more information. So if I do a get command dash question mark, I get the same help that I would if I were to say get dash help space get dash command. So oftentimes using the dash question mark can be a nice shortcut to finding out more information about a particular command. Between get command and get help, you can learn an awful lot about what is available in PowerShell. Get help and get command are going to be your two best friends as you start learning the PowerShell structure. Let's look at a few other items so that we can kind of see how to build on what PowerShell gives us. Earlier we showed how dir was equivalent to a get child item. And there I have my output down below. Another thing you can do is change the current path. So for example, I can come and do a set location, and it changes my folder to C:\projects. I can do it again. This time it's going to take me to my SQL Server Presentations folder. The real power of PowerShell comes in when you start using a concept called pipelining. In pipelining, you combine cmdlets to produce the output you need. For example, I want to combine the get child item. I want to take that output and pipe it through another cmdlet called where object. What where object will do is filter the output. In this case, I'm going to filter for files whose length is greater than 1000 kilobytes. So let me show you that. And you can see now, instead of having all those items, I now have just a handful of files whose length is greater than 100 kilobytes. We'll talk about this more in depth in a later module, but just to give you a brief explanation, the .length command comes from the standard .NET library, and it just says, give me the length of the current object. The $underbar represents whatever the current object is. So what where object is going to do is it's going to loop through every single file coming in from get child item, and each file will be represented by the $undersign. We'll then check the length property for each one of these files, and we'll look for files that are greater than 100 kilobytes in size. Now you may notice the -GT. Most languages use greater than arrow, less than arrow, and so forth to do comparisons. PowerShell, however, uses a lot of those things for the pipelining and the commands and whatnot. So what they chose to do is to make it simple, and they use things like -GT for greater than, -LT for less than, -EQ for equals, and so forth. And we'll see more of those when we get to the programming section of this series. The last thing to note is there is a concept that we can use to denote sizes in terms of not only kilobytes, but also megabytes and gigabytes. We would simply use an MB for megabytes or a GB for gigabytes within PowerShell. It's the only language I know of that has this nice shortcut built into it. Okay, let's build on this, and we're going to come down here, And now we're going to add to our command by tacking on a sort object. What this is going to do is for each output in the where object, it's going to sort that based upon the length. So I'm going to highlight that and run it. And now if you look at the window down below, you can see that we have the same files, but they're now sorted from smallest to largest. Okay, let's come back here. Sometimes these commands can get a bit long when we start pipelining them from one command to another. There's no requirement though that they all actually be on a single line. If I come down here, you can see I've taken the same command and broken it onto 3 lines. Get child item, where object, and sort object. The only requirement is that the pipeline character must be the last character on the line. So now when I highlight this and run it, you can see I get the same results, but the command is now much more readable because it's sorted out over several lines. We can do a little more with this and format our output. We can take the output from sort object and yet again pass it to something else called format table. In format table, we indicate the 2 properties we want to appear, the name and the length, and we've told it to auto size the columns. So now when I come down here and I run that, you can see now I get the name and the length. They've been formatted to take up just as much space as they need, and everything's sorted correctly. There's one last command we'll take a quick look at, and that is the select object. Select object will allow us to only pull certain columns out of our output. So for example, if I wanted to get just the name and the length, I could do that off the get child item, and you can see now in the output below I've just returned the name and the length for each particular item. The items you see that don't have a length are folders. Throughout this video, we've been using our local file system as a way to examine the capabilities of PowerShell. You may have wondered though, why are we using such weirdly named cmdlets to do so? For example, why set location to change our directories, or why get child item to list all the files and folders? PowerShell uses the concept of providers. A provider is a .NET library that provides a standard interface through which we can navigate through whatever object that provider represents. By using the generic concept of providers, we can navigate through any type of object using the same commands that we're comfortable with. The getPSProvider command shows us a list of all the providers we currently have loaded in our environment. Looking at this list, you can see we have providers such as WMI, alias, environment, file system, and so forth. Each one of these providers reveals itself to us in the form of drives. It is through these drives that we can navigate and retrieve data. If I come down here and run the getPSDrive command, on the left it shows us the name of the drive, alias, C, cert, and so forth. And in the middle it shows us which provider is giving us that drive. Let's use the environment provider to take a look at our environment variables. To do so, all I have to do is come down here to our env drive. We'll do a clear host to clear the screen. We'll set the location to the environment drive, and then we'll use getChildItem to find all of those environment variables. And there we go. Down here on the bottom you can see a list of all the environment variables that I currently have. We can use commands like you've seen before to say format the table. Everything we've been doing will continue to work. We can also examine our list of PowerShell aliases through its drive provider. If I set my location to alias, you can see here through the alias provider I get a list of all the current aliases on my current PowerShell environment. We're not limited to using just the providers that are built into PowerShell. We can add new providers. We add new providers through a concept called snap-ins. Let's take a look at what snap-ins we currently have loaded. Our getPS snap-in commandlet shows us our list of currently loaded snap-ins, but we can also have access to snap-ins that are registered but not currently loaded. When I run it with the -registered flag, you can see I have 3 snap-ins that are not currently loaded into my PowerShell environment. You'll see we have 2 of them for the SQL Server. Let's load those up and examine some of its capabilities. To do so, we'll simply use the add ps snap-in command. And I'm going to hit both of these at once. And it doesn't give us any real feedback on the screen, but we can use the get ps snap-in command again. And this time we'll use a name filter, and we'll just get those that start with SQL. And sure enough, now get ps snap-in is telling us that these are loaded. So we can come down here, and let's see that the drive is loaded. And if we look down here, we can see we actually have a drive called SQL Server now. So let's navigate to the SQL Server drive by using the set location command, and this time we'll set our location as SQL Server, and we'll get our list of child items. You can see it returned to us a pretty good list of stuff. We can use the ps child name to get to the data we really need. And you can see now I've got a handful of children. I have SQL, SQL policy, SQL registration, data collection, utility, and DAC. The one we're really interested in is SQL because that's the engine that controls SQL Server. So let's go down here and let's set the location to SQL. And we can see it returns us a list of our servers. This list is provided in the ps child name, and you can see there's the name for my local server, which is just the name of my local computer. So let's go navigate to it, and then we'll see what objects are available on my local server. Well, you see one, the default. That's actually a list of my instances of SQL Server I have, and I only have one, which is the default instance. So let's change to that instance. We'll do set location to it, and we'll see what items are available there. Well, as you can see, we have things like audits, backup devices, databases, and so forth. All the things you would expect to be in a SQL Server instance. If I scroll down, we can actually go to our databases by using set location to databases, and we'll drill down into it and get a list of the databases that are available. And here you can see is a list of all the databases I have. And let's take a look at one of the AdventureWorks one. We'll use one of the lights since that's a fairly small number of tables. And we'll just come down here. We'll come here and we'll set the location to that database, and then we'll see what's there. And then you have all the top level items you'd expect to see in a database: tables, symmetric keys, stored procedures, and so forth. Let's go see what tables are in there. And again, we're going to do a set location to tables, and we're going to get the child items, and we're only going to pull out the ps child name. And there we go. There's a list of all the tables that are available to us in that particular database on our particular SQL Server. So you can see using providers allows us to add a lot of good functionality into PowerShell. When we're done, we should remove any snap-ins we're not using. So we can come down here, and the opposite of add ps snap-in is remove ps snap-in. So we'll just run these removed. And there we go. And now let's validate that they're not there anymore. We'll run the get ps snap-in and only get the names, and sure enough, that is no longer loaded. And we can get our list of providers, and we can see the SQL Server provider is no longer listed. Clearly, Microsoft put a lot of thought into the provider model. Using providers allows developers to become productive very quickly because they can use the commands they are familiar with to work with inside new environments.